Ben, we need to be full screen with the logo. Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we conclude a 5-day program on Compassion 2.0 by reviewing a number of people who've written books and blogs on the matter of love and compassion in our very topsy-turvy world. I would like to conclude my own remarks along the following ways. I think that the central issue that I've sought to highlight for our collective contemplation is, what does love and compassion mean in a time of extremis? Because context shapes content in a very fundamental way. And the context of our world is a context in which the center no longer holds. Climate change is now spinning out of control. We just recorded the 10th month in a row, not only of record heat around the planet, but more dangerously, the 10th month in a row where global temperatures have been over 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and that is the triggering temperature for runaway climate change. So we're now in the reckoning with climate change. At the same time, rather than doing anything about it, our governments are choosing collectively to go to war, led principally by the military-industrial complex of the United States of America. War in Europe, war in the Middle East, escalating conflict toward war in Asia with China. So while the ecology begins to convulse, the human race is choosing conflict, not cooperation. At the heart of all of it is the genocide taking place in Gaza. As we're watching live on TV day by day, the attempted extermination of a people, of a culture, of an ethnicity right before our eyes. It was announced in the news today that the Israeli Defense Force is withdrawing once again from Gaza City, and they're sorting through the rubble and have found at least 60 dead in the rubble, mostly, again, women and children, the elderly, as the Israelis, in addition to completely destroying that part of Gaza City, the hospital, the bank, the schools, residential buildings, leaving nothing but carnage in their wake. Also attacked 2 areas which had been designated as safe zones. So that we were now seeing numbers in the tens of thousands that have been killed, mostly civilians populations, women and children, and that's been also a record. There's been no conflict in modern times where so many civilians have been killed in such a short period of time by the occupying power. What does love mean in a time of extremis? What does love mean in a time of genocide? That question is up for the human race, but particularly for Americans who are the major viewers of this program, because it's the United States of America that is supporting Israel in its genocide. They announced just yesterday more 2,000-pound bombs are being sent to Israel. Israel in the last 8 months has dropped over 500 2,000-pound bombs in an area 5 miles by 20 miles. And that's just the 2,000-pound bombs. It doesn't count all the other bombs and the drones and the weapons of mass destruction. And yet we watch it. So what I'd like to talk about just for a few minutes, because it is so agonizing for me, is how do we understand the work of love? I mentioned T.S. Eliot, that love is the unfamiliar name behind the hands that weave the intolerable shirt of flame that human power cannot remove. And that in the end, he says, we only live, we only aspire to be consumed by fire or fire. How does love work in the choice between fire and fire to be redeemed from fire by fire? This is an imponderable. We can hardly even get our minds around the question, let alone the answer. And the place that I find refuge in this deep conundrum is in Plato's Symposium. And just for a moment, I'd like to bring the genius and wisdom of Plato and Socrates to this extraordinary question of how love weaves fire with fire. In the symposium, there are many aspects to the symposium, but I want to just emphasize one single teaching that came to Socrates from his mentor, Diotima, a wise old crone with whom he consulted and was a student for some time. And she said, the best way to understand how the contradictions are held together in a way that is ultimately redemptive is by understanding that love is not an emotion. It's not what makes you feel good. Love, she says, is an intelligence, a mediating intelligence that is present in all things. And with its intelligence and with the magnetism of what it is at the center of all things, it holds the contradictions together, both in the visible and the invisible realms, and weaves them together, because love, said Diotima, is not the supreme virtue in the universe. Even love, she says, bends the knee before the altar of beauty. And that, I think, is an extraordinarily powerful and profound point that I have contemplated for many years as I've anguished around the extremis of our world, I know love is there. There cannot be anywhere where love is not. But love is not the end of the matter. Love, in effect, is a servant, is a pathway that somehow is capable of taking everything that we create on this pathway called our lives and somehow can amalgamate it and shape it into something that's beautiful. That's why, as Martin Luther King said, in the end, the arc of the universe bends toward justice is because the service of love is for something higher than itself. And that is that which is beautiful, because that ultimately, said Diotima to Socrates, is the true nature of being itself. And of course, that's why Pythagoras, several hundred years before Plato, coined the term cosmos, because he says, in the end, everything that is like a jewel. It's like an ongoing poem. It's like an ongoing song in which we all participate. So as love works its will through the carnage that we create, we know that that does not spare any of us from suffering, but that the river of life, shall we say, within which we cannot ever enter twice, and often at a time far beyond our lifetime, will take the warp and the dross and create something beautiful. And for me, that gives me ultimate hope, not that I can do anything about it necessarily, but that life can, because life is bigger than we are and can take who and what we are and mold it into that which we currently are not. And I think therein lies the wellspring of faith and hope and love. So thank you, everyone, for joining us for this session of Humanity Rising as we contemplate Compassion 2.0. And now I'd like to turn it over to my good friends, Tom Eddington and Carson Kelly, for their comments and our discussion today. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Carson.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, and thanks again for your opening comments. Throughout the last 7 or 8 months, I've been hearing from colleagues and friends about many of the Humanity Rising broadcasts, and just feeling a sense of hopelessness about what can they do with what's happening in Gaza, and looking to us to have some information, have some answers on what people can do. And I would like to share that this week's broadcast in particular around compassion is a very active thing that each of us can do in what's happening. Self-compassion, compassion for the Palestinians, compassion for the Israelis, compassion for the world, in that we're all watching what's happening. And it's as hopefully our audience have walked away from this week with an understanding that it's not a passive activity, this thing called compassion. And so I so appreciate your opening comments today, as well as yesterday and the day before. We've had an opportunity to help the viewers understand the nature of the universe, at least through the perspective of the ancient Greeks and my own personal understanding of the nature of the universe, and the interaction with love and beauty and integrity. So thanks for your opening comments, and really looking forward to wrapping up what's been an extraordinary week on compassion. And with that, a big thank you to my good friend and colleague, Carson Kelly. Carson, welcome, and thank you so much for helping to put together an amazing group of panelists. So turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. And also thank you again, Jim, for those comments. I don't even call them comments because they're much more than that, but thank you very much. It was very, very beautiful. And to Tom's point and to Jim's implied point, just to say something I don't normally say, which is the imperative for this work, could never be more present. And as things become even more difficult and more harm and suffering makes itself seen, is the precise point by which we lean into and put our shoulder behind the wheel of compassion, so to speak. And yeah, so anyway, there's a lot to say, and I'll just say thank you again, Jim, for those comments. Very, very touching, very, very poignant. And Tom, thank you for inviting me onto the show. I'd also like to thank Jim and the team at Humanity Rising for the opportunities to bring on truly amazing people to come and share their work and their frames of being to the audience. And to your point, I hope it's been beneficial. My name is Carson Kelly, and I'm the founder of Compassion 2.0. Compassion 2.0 is a collection of professionals who are attempting to scale compassion through the intentional architecture of compassionate human experience that is both based on scientifically validated practices and interventions, and that can be measured. We do this through the creation of compassionate and flourishing frameworks through both product development and organizational culture architecture. Our community consists of organizational developers and leaders, product developers, neuroscientists, behavioral scientists, coaches, people professionals, UX, UI designers, entrepreneurs, VCs, and more. And you can learn more about us at compassion2.com. As also has been discussed, this week has been about Compassion 2.0's extended friends and family members and their books and their blogs. And today we are very, very fortunate to have someone that I have great respect and admiration for, as I do for everyone that I've been on the show and others. But in particular, really like Jay. So Jay Vidyarthi, if you could join us. Jay is the founder and principal behind Still Ape, which he'll speak to in a moment. So anyway, Jay, welcome.
Thanks for having me. And thank you for those words, Jim and Tom and Carson. Great introduction.
Yeah, no big deal to follow up on, Jay. So anyway, let's jump on in. So Jay, tell us, so for those, Jay's been on the show before, and just as a reminder for those of you who don't know, Jay is multifaceted outside of being an amazing product person in the sense of UX, UI design initially, and with other talents around that. He's also both a practitioner as well as a teacher, and also the author of a great Substack called The Attention Activist. So Jay, with that as a simple intro, why don't you just let people know a bit more about yourself and how you've come to be on your path and the kinds of work you're doing right now.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I think a question like this can lead to me rambling about myself for way too long. So I think what I'll say about where I'm at right now, let's stick to the present moment. I think that's wise. We'll get into that. But I think it's sort of like I work in technology. I grew up on technology. I love video games. I, was programming stuff before I was 10, playing around with tech. And there was a promise in those early days of internet proliferation of what it could do to better humanity. And I think in the past 10 years, with a heavy heart, we've seen technology play different roles in our society, roles that influence our politics, our health, our sleep, our children, our relationships. And it's leading, ironically enough, to a polarization in our opinion and view of technology itself. And so, as someone who's also been going through my own transition in mindfulness and wisdom and compassion and exploring these practices in my personal life, I've been working to integrate those worlds. So, I'm a Gemini, so I've got two facets. And one facet is I still work in technology, but I only work on technology that I deem wise. And that's not what it says on Still Ape's website. What it says on Still Ape's website is we work on technologies for well-being, mindfulness, and compassion. But then I also have been practicing and experimenting with mindful awareness in the face of all this technology. And where I find myself now is kind of practicing a middle way between those who believe technology and AI will accelerate us to some utopian singularity where we will merge with robots and all our problems will be solved, which we can kind of refer to as the accelerationists. But then also, I suspect probably a lot of people here would be maybe a little bit counter to that accelerationist perspective. But I also find myself kind of distancing myself from the wellness people who are becoming anti-technology and even anti-humanity, who are saying like humans are bad, technology is bad, this is all poison. We need to, make the world great again and get rid of all of our technology and go back into a time where there wasn't technology. And to me, I've been circling around this term of attention activism as a call not only to reclaim our minds, to reclaim our ability to pay attention, but also to reclaim our technology as part of our nature by staying aware of the forces that pull at our attention and making more intentional choices about where we direct attention. Because in an attention economy, which is where we live now, this is a radical act. And so I really do think that technology is a part of the solution here. And just because it's currently a part of the problem, it's sort of like a funhouse mirror. Technology is amplifying our intelligence, but maybe not amplifying our wisdom in the same way, but it doesn't have to be that way. And so that's where the design work I'm doing, the company, the Substack, which if you follow my Substack, you know that I just recently announced a book that's coming out next year. And so all of this is kind of at that intersection of, if we're thinking about the ancient Greek philosophers, like the center point of a virtue, I believe that there's this idea that like the virtues are a point of balance between two extremes. But similarly, those who might follow like Eastern religions might see like the Buddha's middle way as relevant as well between the extreme views of technology and the polarization that we see. So I don't know, there's some fodder to start with. We can dive into whatever you think is worth it, and happy to answer questions that come from the chat as well if there's anything we can go deeper into.
Yeah. Tom, anything in particular for you at this early juncture? You're on mute.
Yeah, I'd like to start with this word we call technology.
No.
I think it's a good place to start this conversation. If I think about technology in its broadest sense and the 240,000 years or so that humans have existed on the planet, we have had extraordinary technology, things like language, the ability to speak, the movement from being hunters and gatherers to becoming agrarian. And so, technology's been with us, the ability to make fire, etc. It's been with us since the very beginning of humanity, or nearly the beginning. And so part of me can go to just accept that it's our companion throughout the evolution of history. And there have been times when it has been used for good, and times that it has not served the planet and not served society. And so I'm wondering if that might be a good place for us to start.
Sure. It's absolutely true. The long perspective of technology is the way that I think about it is that technology is human nature.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that we have been practicing. And it's funny because, often in today's society, we'll say something like, I need to get out to nature. I need to go on a nature walk, right? And it's like, what we're really saying is I need to escape from human nature for a while. right? Because there's something about walking in the forest where you experience this immediacy of presence awareness, and there's a simplicity to these animals and these trees that are thriving with the life force, but are not plagued by intelligence. And that's an interesting thing. Like, they have obviously forms of intelligence, but you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about our abstraction and conceptuality that defines the entire modern world and is actually leading us into a lot of problems. And so, yeah, when someone starts to be like, oh, technology is ruining society, I'm kind of like, the language you're using is a technology. And so is the singing bowl you use to meditate, and the yoga mat, and the car you use to get around, and, everything, the shelter that keeps you from the rain, and the way you cook your food. So we have to be a little bit more nuanced when we talk about what's happening with technology in the kind of modern world. And so I think the other part of this is, like, if you think of the etymology of technology, it's really that we're using our intelligence to a skill or a craft, like the technos, and we're trying to actually, amplify or optimize something using our intelligence. Like, it goes beyond just, here's a stick and I can use it to hit this thing and then I throw the stick away. It's created this weird and wonderful society that we live in. And I think we have to be more nuanced when we talk about technology. And, like, I know I've already probably evoked in a lot of people's minds the concept of AI by using the word intelligence in the context of technology. And it's highly relevant, right? Because our artificially intelligent algorithms here are, again, amplifying this intelligence, but they seem to be missing that thing that you're finding when you walk in the forest, that wisdom, that moment awareness, present moment awareness that can actually govern. And so I think the question about, like, what is love and compassion in, an extreme time? And I think we have to be, in the world of technology, I think we have to think about it in terms of applying intelligence to wisdom, right? So if intelligence is this conceptual, abstract game that we all play, and it's like a zero-sum game, and we all fight each other and challenge each other because of these concepts we have about who we are and who other people are, and we end up killing each other and destroying the planet because we want to be ahead and have the best economy. It's all just intelligence, right? And it's very powerful, obviously. But if wisdom, we're thinking of that direct awareness toward insight and truth and love, and it's non-conceptual. The reality is, as Daniel Schmachtenberger likes to put it, it's like the wise civilizations get outcompeted in games of intelligence. But if we can apply intelligence to amplify that wisdom, then I think we have a chance at changing. And that's where I'm very passionate about technology's role, because I've had the opportunity to work on technologies which I would define that way, which we have applied a lot of intelligence and even capital to create things that I do believe are increasing wisdom in the world. And if only that were mainstream technology, then maybe we'd think about technology a little bit different, and not as our enemy, but we'd re-embrace it as our nature, and maybe actually equipping the better angels of our nature with that technology.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up AI. I mean, for me, the question, and we've had several sessions on the need for ethical or compassionate AI on Humanity Rising. And for me, the jury is still out. What is AI? Is it access to information? Is it access to intelligence? Is it augmented intelligence? Is it artificial intelligence? What is this thing we call AI? And how do we use it to your point, to enable us to really access wisdom and to come from a place of wisdom?
Yeah, I've started to explore this. Obviously, I don't have all the answers. AI is very nascent, but the tongue-in-cheek answer is AI are two letters. They're a conceptual word that we've created to label a certain thing. But it's actually more, the lines are blurry, because in some ways, like, when you have a board of collective intelligence, there's all kinds of artificial intelligence that is at play without even computers involved, in terms of, like, groupthink. A way to put this is, like, in the 90s, when I was first learning about neural networks in school, there was a lot of debate about, like, what the end game was for these neural networks. And there were a lot of reasonable thinkers who were like, listen, if you program the equivalent of neurons on a computer and you train it, maybe we can get it to like navigate a maze, or maybe we can get it, but it's not going to go so far as to like be what we think of as like human intelligence. But then the moment I had a conversation with ChatGPT, there was kind of a double moment, because it was first, whoa, this is just that same technology at massive scale trained on the data set that we've produced in the past 30 years, which we call the internet. And it's extremely compelling in terms of its ability to chat and hold a conversation. But there was this other insight, which was like, oh, so that's not what I am, because that's telling me that these little neurons in my brain, in a purely mechanical way, wired together through training through my senses, can be formulating the sentences that are coming out of my mouth right now. So I am not this. This is artificial intelligence. The thing that's creating this sentence, talking to you through Zoom technology spread out around the world, it's just a continuum of this intelligence. And as a practitioner, wisdom is something different. I saw that clear distinction between like what my Zen teachers have taught me about non-conceptual awareness outside of language, outside of ideas, outside of words. So fundamentally, I don't believe AI can be wise, because wisdom comes from experience. But what AI can do is it can process with intelligence the wisdom of people and replay that back to us in a time of need at a very great moment, and it can still be useful, but it cannot itself be wise, in my view. And this might change because it's, it's new and I don't know where things are going and I'm not an AI expert. But from what I've seen, there is a way to think of AI as unable to be wise, but able to share and communicate wisdom through intelligence. And I think there's humans like that as well.
I'm just sitting with what you've been speaking to here for a moment. You're creating a new perspective. I think
That's
the thing that, yeah, no, I always learn from you. I think that the thing that's striking me in this conversation is the subject-object split in these conversations that we're having. We and technology, we and nature. There's this separation in all of our thinking. I'm first in line on that one. And what I think is interesting is, at what point does that go away? And you've been speaking to this in a certain way, and I'm going to try to get this language right. Everything created is simply an expression of us, right? So there is no differentiation, to your point, in my understanding of it, in terms of the creator and the created. It's particularly in an embodied state, because we are a part of a natural environment, whatever natural means. We are part of this environment, and we have the ability to manipulate the environment, to your point about creating computers that have this software that's running the Zoom, that's being transmitted over wires or through the air and so forth. And I really loved what you did there, in the sense of even tying it back to the ability to create words and to put those words forward. Like, at what point does that continuum that stop? There's an artificial line between maybe a human and an inventor or a speaker or what have you, and the mechanisms by which we are conducting this actual conversation, to everything, as I understand it, as to what you were saying. So go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I just a quick response to that. I mean, I think the pursuit of that line is an intelligent pursuit. And I mean that to say we are very intelligent, and through all this technology, it's clear that intelligence is a powerful force. But I think those of us who've explored various wisdom traditions and even modern incarnations of the such, or even just had an experience of like, what I would call non-conceptual awareness, but like there are many, Latin and Sanskrit and Greek words to capture this like immediacy of being that tells me that there's another side to that spectrum, right? Because you were drawing like AI to Zoom to computers to technology to language. There's something here. There's something here that's not happening with ChatGPT, right? And it's
Agreed.
like, and what that is like, I think what people in wisdom traditions are exploring, and there's many different ideas and thoughts, and those intelligences around that. For example, if someone is writing a book, or a teacher is sharing some information about how to access these states, that's what I call compassion, because that is intelligence applied to wisdom. someone who's writing or, writing a guided meditation. Let's use that as a simple, accessible example. You're using intelligence and language to create a vehicle to bring people to that wise space. And that's where I think technology, if we think of it as an extension of our intelligence and now the artificial intelligence, the more that we can use all this technology to bring wisdom and to share wisdom, I think the better. But that doesn't mean the technology itself is wise. And I think
Understood.
there's a line there that people are easily walking over. Like a lot of the accelerationists are just like, oh yeah, we're so close to AGI and it's going to be indistinguishable to human. And an AI is exactly like we are. But and I'm not saying I philosophically have an opinion whether that's possible or not, but I certainly haven't seen anything where like, oh, clearly these robots are going to be wise and actually be able to experience and be conscious in the way that these wisdom traditions have explored. But I think someone shared in the chat as well, I actually worked with many teachers of wisdom traditions who at some point I realized were doing the same thing ChatGPT is. Like, I was like, I don't actually think you've experienced what you're talking about. I think you've read a lot of books. And, that's part of the journey. We've all been there. I'm not trying to disparage those people, but humans do that as well because we have intelligence and wisdom. So I'm just exploring here with you guys. But I think like, I'm out on a limb a little bit. I don't know how defensible this is, but I'm just trying to openly share my view of what I'm seeing out there and what I'm seeing with technology.
I think what's interesting too, just kind of 2 points. The first of which is, and let me be clear, I have no idea, none. Just exploring this in a Socratic method, with you in an engagement. Couple things that came up for me as you were expressing your thoughts and perspective. A is this notion of applying intelligence to wisdom to create vehicles by which people can experience that wisdom also begets the question of the intention of the creator, namely, why bother, right? Because if you go back to the notions of compassion as maybe defined as the ability to empathetically connect with another human, and then again, there's different subtle nuances. We were speaking to Scott Snibbe about this yesterday in terms of what compassion actually, how it's defined. But the notion that I share a feeling, a sense of how you feel or how you think is an empathetic frame. And then in the event that I determine that you might be suffering, and with your permission, which also was a point made in yesterday's chat, which I want to acknowledge, but with your permission, I can come forward and try to take action to alleviate that suffering for your benefit, not for mine. That is coming from a place that's on this side, so to speak, that I think you're speaking to, which becomes a whole thing as to why do teachers even bother, particularly if you are realized and fully, however you want to define that, why bother? Why does the Dalai Lama, as the Bodhisattva, technically, that's what he is, according to his version of Tibetan Buddhism, he is actively choosing not to go into states of full realization until all beings who suffer are realized, which is, of course, going to take a little while. So the fact that he's choosing to incarnate, and regardless if he chooses to do it again in the Chinese and the whole thing that we had discussed yesterday, let's just say for a moment that he continues that tradition and he shows up as a woman or he shows up in some other way. It doesn't matter. I use the pronoun he because that's what he is right now. But regardless of all of that, why bother? Yeah. And so that's one part. The other part is, in terms of the experience and the conveyance of wisdom through technology or intelligence, rather, I've had the great good fortune to actually be in the room with the Dalai Lama, who teased me for looking old, which was an amazing experience after my wedding and the birth of my 3 children. But beyond that, like when he cruises in, and I know Tom has met him, and Tom has met many a great teacher, and as have you, Jay. So when a being like that comes into a room, and for me at least, when I experience that and others, the barometric pressure in the room changes. Like everything just fundamentally changes, and for me at least, it's like, oh, like I'm in greatness. I'm in the sense of like there's an experience. So there's that. And then the other thing, just to make this even more confusing,
don't worry, I'm taking notes.
If we then go through the whole thread of like what Anil Seth and the work that's going on, as I understand it from a very limited perspective, on the arguments happening in the neuroscience field, around the Cartesian principle of a subject-object dualism, namely I am and, an objective world and that split, versus what some of these other neuroscientists are speaking to that say that that doesn't exist. And that ultimately all of the inputs that are coming in physiologically, mentally, all of these different things are actually our experience. And these are my words, not anybody else's, is just a reaction to that. And there is no there. So there you go.
All right,
What are your thoughts?
Let me pick from the buffet here. So yeah, I don't know the answers to these questions, but I have some thoughts definitely that I can share.
I wish you did.
One thing that is really, I think, really useful here is when you were talking about compassion and the way that I've been talking about it, right? So when you're face to face with a human being, I mean, whether they're a bodhisattva or just an everyday person or whatever it might be, there is a felt sense of compassion, which I agree is on the kind of wisdom side, right? Where it's like, and I think I'm not a wisdom teacher, certainly not in metta and loving kindness specifically. And I think there's a lot of wonderful exploration of that, which again is on this side of the spectrum, which is we're trying to explore the wisdom of compassion in that present moment of experience. And what is it that interconnects us and leads to interbeing, which is beautiful in exploration. But on the other side, there is also compassion. For example, I have never been to the Gaza Strip, but through technology and media and Jim's words and other types of intelligence, I am able to apply intelligence to that wisdom to remind myself of what's actually happening over there. And actually, I wouldn't say what's actually happening. I have a very filtered view of what's actually happening. I have no idea what's actually happening on that film sense. But to me, a great journalist, an empathic, compassionate journalist, is applying intelligence to compassion in that way and to wisdom, right? So yes, there's compassion in the moment. Yes, there's what you feel when a great wise soul comes in and you have that connection. But I think there is applying intelligence to compassion. And, my work as a designer and a technologist, I also can point to technologies that bring people together, technologies that bring compassion. And that's, again, the vast majority of our technology is driven by this myopic intelligence without wisdom. And
Totally.
So we see our funhouse mirror where some of our worst instincts are being amplified and demolishing aspects of our society. I was struck by the idea that love bends the knee to beauty as a kind of aspirational vision here. And I think, one way we might think about why teach, and it might be why a lot of great teachers who have this realization, who access deep wisdom, decide to teach, is they look around and they see that not just love, but everything is bending the knee to intelligence in this world. Everything. Every single thing, from the way we think about our personal lives and careers, to the way we overschedule our children, to the way our governments are run, to the way technology companies are run. Everything is just about playing the numbers game and playing in the conceptual game. And so my guess is that these very wise souls, they look around and they say, whoa, intelligence, again, I'm invoking Schmachtenberger, who says intelligence is outpacing wisdom, which I think is a very strong idea that, we are just in a society run by intelligence, and I'm not sure it's getting us to the place we need to go. But I think my hope and optimism comes from the resilience and anti-fragility of humanity and our ability to access wisdom. And if only we can find more wisdom, and I would call us to use technology to allow wisdom to actually compete in this race as a part of that. So that's kind of like where my personal motivations come to think about technology in that way. So I'm not sure I answered all your huge questions, but hopefully that's...
No, you buttoned them up quite nicely. It's beautiful. Thank you. Everything I need to know about consciousness, existence, the divinity.
We did it.
Yeah, it's great. Okay. So thank you, everyone. Next week, I'm just...
Yeah, just to jump in, picking up on Carson's buffet that he put out there, and the nature of your work, or part of your work, as I understand it, Jay, around attention. So if the human body, or not if, the human body is hit with billions of pieces of data information per second sensorially, and about 4,000 of those billions of pieces of information actually get to the human brain. And most of that gets processed by the brainstem, the amygdala, the mammalian brain, and a very, very small percentage gets to the prefrontal cortex. We end up experiencing reality through those series of filters. We end up putting our attention based on whatever it is that actually gets to the prefrontal cortex. And so I'm wondering, to Carson's a series of questions and the work that you do around attention, and it's been a thought experiment I've been playing with for the last several months, of what if I can turn my attention dial just slightly to key off of different information, different pieces of data that are hitting my collective mind. How does that shift how I'm showing up in the world, how I'm filtering, how I'm experiencing the world? And I'm wondering if there's a different way to answer in part Carson's questions through your work with attention and where we put our attention.
I think I think we underestimate the answer to that question, because I think that's why I'm so passionate about attention activism, because in my own experience and what I've learned, I suspect that our ability to make more intentional choices about where we direct our attention is an incredible piece of not just our own personal thriving, but humanity's future. I think that we live in, like you described, this battleground of attention where corporations and political parties and YouTube creators and even this podcast, everyone is fighting for each other's attention. And so it's created this situation where our mind is being stretched in so many different ways, and we've got all these filters of intelligence that are shaping the way we see the world. And with a little bit of wisdom, if you think of the interplay between kind of open present moment awareness and our ability to kind of target the flashlight of our attention, and we look at technologists and designers and marketers, I want to include them, as choreographers of attention, who are saying, look at this flashing red thing. You have 3 notifications, and the only thing you really need to care about is like which friend of yours posted today. Or that if you think about marketing, right? It's like, I saw this ad, it was like a billboard for a credit card. And it had this picture of this like glam shot of the credit card and some statement. And there was like this like arm with like a beautiful suit jacket and a cufflink and a nice watch. And it was like the gold infinite credit card. And I was like, you know what that ad is it's designed to make me feel inadequate. It's designed to make me feel like I didn't try hard enough. I don't make enough money. And if only I get this credit card, then I'm going to feel like I made it. Like, it's very, very manipulative of our attention. But ultimately, that's where intelligence leads us, because they're just trying to win the game. Like, they're not trying to make me feel bad about myself. They're just trying to win the dollars. And so that's where, from an attention activist perspective, I believe that all of us in our individual lives, where we think about what can we do, I really do believe change comes from within, and that there's some element of this before we get to the activism out in society and changing our systems and starting organizations and scientific investigation and regulation of technology and all the things that we definitely need to do. I think all of us as individuals, when we harness our ability to pay attention, to choose what we pay attention to, we take a very radical act in a society that is trying to harvest our attention and use it to win these power games. We actually stand up for our ability to be okay as who we are, to fill the holes in our heart with presence, to pay attention to what we deem relevant in our lives, like our kids. And, the book that I'm writing is the practical side of this, which we're going to talk about maybe later, but it's like, there are many practical things that I've explored that help us actually try to find this in daily life and try to bring that awareness. But I think the first step is, if you just, for the rest of the day, anyone who's listening to this, is bringing awareness to the way different media affect you, trying to bring that same awareness you bring in kind of a silent meditation, but like while you're watching TV, it's incredible the level of insight that can arise about who you are and what's happening in the world. You're going to see that countdown timer that's trying to get you to watch the next episode, and you're going to feel this well of motivation in your body, and you're going to be like, oh, that's a very powerful dark pattern of design that's getting me to watch this next episode. But here's a really, really important point, which is, if I see that and say, oh, I don't want to watch the next episode, nice try, you manipulated me, that's definitely a kind of attention activism move. But what's just as much of an attention activist move is to see that countdown and say, oh, I see that trick, but actually I do want to watch the next episode. I intentionally choose to watch the next episode because there's nothing wrong with TV. TV's great. The part is when they're trying to trick us into doing things that are not intentionally who we are. And the more we practice with that awareness and that attention, I believe we can actually stand up to these systems in our own lives. And I think that's a vital ingredient, along with all the societal activism and technology and regulation. That's a vital ingredient that needs to be a part of this conversation that I feel is lacking. And that's why I'm writing about it.
It's fabulous.
Yeah.
Tom, did you want to add something there? If not, I'll add something.
Yeah, I was just going to add a piece that's, just knowing what I know about you. The other piece I would add is just who's the you that's asking those questions? Who's the you that's observing? Is it the wounded child you? Is it the adaptive child you? Is it the wise adult you? And just having the consciousness to know from that moment, who is it, the me that's asking myself those questions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, right? I think there's a mysterious aspect of who we are, right? I could go and we could invoke internal family systems and talk about the wise adult self, or we could talk about spirituality and that kind of pure awareness or whatever. But really, that's just me parroting some frameworks that I've learned. The reality is, I don't know, but in my subjective experience, not only, and this is important, I think, I'm glad you asked this question because it surfaced an important point, which is, not only do I believe there is some mysterious force that's able to act with more intention in those ways, but I've also personally experienced that it's trainable. That the more that I've done that, my skill and ability to surf this world has increased 100-fold in terms of like me being in my early 20s and just not even being an authentic self and just parroting all the things I think I'm supposed to be. And I'm supposed to be macho because I'm male, and I'm supposed to be this, and I'm supposed to be that, and I'm supposed to succeed because that's what people value. And like being able to deconstruct some of those narratives and find an authentic choice in some of this has been a skill that I've been developing. And I think maybe the reason I'm so passionate about it is, for some reason, all the people who've taught me about this have not really taught me how to apply it to technology. And I grew up playing video games and coding DOS, like that's my world. Like, and I don't accept that because a few bad actors have made all this technology that's harvesting our minds, that I can't be fascinated by this thing that has fascinated me my whole life, that I can't love a video game or enjoy watching TV or connect with my friends over Zoom or like see my like technology is something I love. And I'm almost angry that it's been so demonized and abused and used in this way. And so I have been applying this awareness and attention and wisdom to my interactions with technology. And I have found actually technology can be a very beautiful part of our lives, despite these forces. And with us working in our own lives and with us changing elements of society to make this work, I really do think technology can be a huge part of our pursuit of wisdom. And I've seen it in my own life. I've designed things that help people. And there's a long way to go, but I definitely do believe that.
I'm really loving what you're saying, Jay. I've known you and I've heard and discussed these. I've heard your perspective and discussed these things, but it's just this particular conversation is extremely clarifying. I would also add to what you're saying, to your point. I mean, if we think about it now, we can pick up our phones and basically hear any music that we want to from any point in time, from any part of the world. And obviously people have re-recorded that and made that available. That's phenomenal. The ability, to your earlier point about at least getting some level of news about what's happening in other parts of the world where harm is being perpetuated, can then hopefully drive us as individuals in our own political frame to be able to talk to our representatives, to encourage them and the government to make different choices. These things are all incredibly important and incredibly powerful. I think what's, to your point, or my reading of your point, technology is empty in the sense of a Buddhist principle, right? It's neither harmful nor beneficial. It's just how it's used, its intention, its impact, et cetera. And I think what becomes very interesting in the notion of the intention or attention rather, is that time, as I understand it, is probably the only non-renewable resource that we quote have, which, arguably we don't. And as the Tibetans like to say, you never know in the next moment, you might wake up in the next day, or when you go to sleep, you might wake up in the next day or wake up in your next life. You don't know at what point this incarnation will be done. So between now and that inevitability, there is a certain amount that's available. And I think to what I'm hearing you say is that if we succumb to those that want to win the dollar and extract essentially capital, financial value out of us via our own use of our own non-renewable resource of our attention, I think that's how I'm framing what I'm hearing you say. And the goal, therefore, is to live in that moment, and regardless of who's doing the asking or who the I is in those moments, to Tom's point,
I think
is being able to have that awareness, to be able to make choice, and to be able to not just get sucked into the next attention thing. Is that what?
I think that's a reasonable framing. And I want to invoke this idea of how we might apply all this to thinking about creating something beautiful, right? I think I previously spoke about when we're practicing these wisdom traditions, we're reclaiming our minds in our own lives. And I think once we establish some of that, we are able to create something beautiful. And what I would define that is again, using intelligence in service of wisdom, creating something that brings more of this to other people, that brings it to ourselves and brings it to other people. And I think there's great artists who have made pieces that have just bowled me over and grounded me in the moment and made me question the wonder and the mystery of the universe. But there's also great app developers who have done that, and great musicians who've done that. And there is something there, right? I was guided for me, when I think about loving kindness and compassion practice, one of the strongest practices for me to build on your idea about time are practices around death, right? Which some at an external perspective see as morbid. But if I imagine myself on my deathbed and I really use my intelligence, my conceptual mind, to build this vision of what it'll be like at the end of my life, and then I come back into the present moment, I'm so much more grounded in my interconnection to others and what really matters, which is a simple creation of something beautiful that brings wisdom into my life. And so there is that possibility to use intelligence to support that cause of bringing more present moment awareness and wisdom, and to use our time wisely, I think is very, very possible.
Tom, do you have anything at this point?
I'm just pondering this conversation, and just holding the importance of being very intentional about how we use every moment of this thing we call a precious life, and where do we put our attention, and how do we ensure that we're as meaning-making machines, how do we make sure that we're using this, so many poets and others have spoken to this precious life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me too, just to build on that idea, it's hard to be alive at one level, right? It's hard, I think, as time has gone by and, through the use of technology and technologies, there's some number of people, and I would imagine the three of us sitting on this call would fall into this category, and not everybody on the planet by any means fits in this category. But there's a growing number of people who have, through sophisticated economic machinations that we're a part of, we have the ability to generate the food and the shelter and the things that we need in order to take care of the basics, which then results at one level. We can do that with less effort than, I think, say 1,000 years ago, or 500 years ago, or what have you. So we've created more time to experience not working or not struggling, to just stay alive. And within that delta, I think the natural orientation to our experience as humans is to ultimately have to engage in the question of what happens when we die. And I think that can, for myself, I'll just speak for myself. For myself, that can create a fair amount of anxiety and concern. And, as a result, and in the face of that, then, letting Netflix do the countdown and go into the next session or the next, episode of Below Deck, like, let's go, like, not that I want to do that all the time, but it makes sense at a certain level. And I think, part of the call of the intention is not only inhabiting the space by which we can bring awareness to those choices at a deep fundamental level, but then I think it also presupposes at some level a certain willingness to, or not a willingness, but a comfort or a willingness to orient ourselves towards some of these more spiritual questions, and to ultimately then kind of deal potentially with some unresolved pain. I don't need to thread all this stuff together in that sense, but it feels like that's part of this equation when it comes to reclamation of attention. Any thoughts about that, Jay?
Yeah, I think what that calls up for me is maybe kind of looping in why design is such a big part of this for me, because we're thinking about this precious attention. We're thinking about, what Tom said about trying to be in every moment. But those are very aspirational and challenging things to do. And we can beat ourselves up about it, right? We can beat ourselves up and feel a lot of guilt and shame for watching TV. And that's not helpful, right? That's not what this is about. This is not about feeling guilty when you're not in the present moment. Really, the positioning that we talked about technology being neutral is only true if you're thinking technology as a fundamental, like, human principle. The technology that is dominating our society right now is not neutral.
Yeah, agreed.
Right?
Totally.
Right. And so we're actually kind of running against this attention economy, and we're trying to find that presence, but then we're also beating ourselves up about how we're not doing good enough a lot. And it's, reminds me of like the TikTok influencer with the 6-pack. And it's like, I wake up so early in the morning, it's yesterday, and I do 5,000 sit-ups, and you're just like watching this, like, good for you. I feel like horrible about myself now, right? But I think there's starting to be some of that content around disconnection. It's like someone goes and they're like, I have my lovely tea and I live in the Cambodian rainforest or whatever. And you're just sitting there like with your bag of Doritos, like, what am I doing with my life? And like, I don't think this guilt and shame is helping us, right? I think fundamentally what this is about kind of a third wave of motivation as to why these wisdom traditions are so important. That's becoming even more important, right? Because I think 3,000 years ago, these wise philosophers already saw that intelligence was dominating, right? And that the wisdom was lacking. And that's continuing. And we have this opportunity now to say, wait, intelligence has gotten to this point, like, look at these marvels around us and they're quite incredible. But the way that we're designing them, the way that we're using them is sometimes lacking wisdom. And I want to use 2 examples. Someone shared a love letter to TikTok in the chat. And I know, Carson, you mentioned, Spotify and like music streaming services that we all use. These are 2 examples of many of technologies where, yes, they bring a lot of joy into our lives. They bring a lot of wisdom, but there are aspects about the way they're designed that are problematic. So for example, TikTok, it's a double-edged sword. There's so much amazing content and creative work and connection going on in these short form videos, in the same way that you have access on YouTube Music and Spotify of like the world's music. But the way they're designed is actually reducing the ability for compassion and interconnection. So people are moving on streaming service and they're losing their relationship with the artists behind that music. You're just putting on like dinner party mix and you don't care who's playing that saxophone, right? Same with TikTok. You're seeing someone for 30 seconds and maybe you follow them and they disappear, and like you start to build relationships with some, but everything is so disposable and flippant. And so I'm not saying that streaming music and short form video have to go away, but I think the more wisdom we bring into design, the more we can kind of understand how we can use our intelligence in service of like creating these miracles while also maintaining some sort of presence and respecting people's right. And I would go that far, respecting people's right to a freedom of attention, the same way we have freedom of speech, a freedom of attention.
It's a powerful idea. Any particular technologies that you've worked on or seen that really come to the surface for you? That
As
you are,
examples of,
yeah, just examples of something that, you think is just amazing.
well, what comes to mind, because we talked a little bit about video games, and I think video games have a really nasty reputation these days, and people picture 14-year-old boys like killing each other and playing 10 hours a day. I was one of those little boys, by the way. So I would encourage people to look up video games that are not violent and that are actually embodying some sense of empathy or some sense of attention. And there's a number of examples, right? So the last time I was on the show, we were with Genova Chen, and he has a game called Journey, which I highly recommend, especially if you're listening to this and you're not a gamer. If you have access, like your kid has a console or something, go try to find and play Journey and report back. There's other games, like there's a game called Senua's Sacrifice, where your protagonist is schizophrenic, and it simulates, they use science to kind of inform the approach of design to simulate the experience of hearing voices. And you'll never like see the random person screaming on the sidewalk again. You will have so much more empathy and compassion for what they're actually dealing with after you play this game. In terms of like outside of video games, I'm actually really interested right now in news platforms that are trying to rethink like the polarization of the news cycle. So there's like a platform called Kialo, which presents like crowdsourced debates. So for every issue, you're looking at all the strongest arguments on both sides. There's things like Improve the News and Fix the News, where they're using AI to collect all the different news reporting and position it on a political spectrum. So when you see a story, you're like, here's what CNN says here, and here's what Fox says here, and you get the gestalt of like the facts. And there's actually another one called Verity, where they use AI. Think about this application of AI. It's really beautiful. They look at all the news stories and they instruct the AI to extract the facts that everyone agrees on, and they separate the facts from the spin. So they're like, here are the facts that everyone's reporting, and then here's all the different kinds of spin. Here's the left-leaning spin, the right-leaning spin. Here's the pro-establishment spin, the anti-establishment spin. And it's like, an interesting, compassionate way. And then, I think I can also plug our mindfulness app. So I'm a teacher on the Healthy Minds program. It's completely free. It's working with Dr. Richie Davidson at the Center for Healthy Minds and Healthy Minds Innovations. And yeah, we're not asking for any money. It's an evidence-based meditation program. And I believe it's, the best way out there to build up some of these skills of awareness in your daily life. So I could go on, but there's some.
I'm sure you could. Bunch of messages in the chat about just one more time, the names. But so you talked about Genova Chen's game Journey. There's also another free game by Genova called Sky, Children of the Light. Incredible. People have gotten over PTSD playing it. It's designed specifically to be compassionate and empathetic. People have been on their last breaths staying in the game because of the community that they've developed there. It's tremendous. And then you mentioned the game about the schizophrenic. Oh, great. There we go.
Yeah, I'm just throwing them in the chat for everyone.
Okay, fabulous. Wonderful. Thank you.
I think that's all the ones I mentioned.
Sure. Is there a resource? Are you by chance collecting these things that you come across and make them available in any way?
So I share things on my Substack. I think there was a post a while ago where I summed them up, and I'm actually planning to do another one. And there's actually some references in the book coming up too. So
great.
That would be the place to stay in touch. I'll put that link over there too.
Yeah, that'd be great, because I think a big part of the problem is, again, to the point, is the attention required to go and hunt these things down. So if it's able to, as it's part of your normal work, of course, by providing it,
I think like if people out there want to try one thing practical, I still stand by my earlier suggestion. Like before we go out and get new tools and all that sort of stuff.
Sure.
See if there's something that you're going to be using today, like your favorite app or the thing that you pull out your phone to look at, or TV or whatever, and see if you can turn that into a meditation. Like sit up, get comfortable, turn on Netflix, notice your body, like notice as you get paralyzed by choice about what you want to watch. Choose to watch something, inquire into why you're watching it. Notice how you feel in the character switches. When the parts are really making you laugh or enjoy it, feel that enjoyment in your body. When you're feeling like hard emotions or you feel like you're numbing out, notice that without judgment. That's what I would really recommend as a starting point. whether it's TV or a movie or a social media app or whatever.
That's a great practice. Very great practice. Well, I want to be mindful of the time. Tom, so I'm going to toss it to you for any last minute thoughts, and then you can ask Jim to come in when you're ready to do that.
Yeah, what I'm struck by in this conversation is the whole purpose of this week, which is around self-compassion and compassion for others. And each of the points in the conversation we've had today, for me, has led me back to compassion and the importance of compassion. And I just really appreciate the conversation today and each of the discussions this week. And I'm grateful that you've been with us today, Jay, and certainly been a great week for me, Carson. So thank you. And with that, I think we should bring Jim back into the conversation to wrap up today's conversation and the program and the whole week of programs.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Carson. And thank you, Jay. I've been very stimulated by your remarks. I have two areas that I'd love to explore with all of you. The first is this notion that we keep saying like a mantra that technology is neutral. And I want to just point out that is a very modern, very Western, and specifically very American notion, not shared in antiquity and not shared in Asia until the conquest of Asia by the Western European tradition. And I think it's very important that we pause just for a moment, because I think, as you pointed out in one of your later remarks, Jay, we're discovering that technology is not neutral at all. And we don't know what to do about it because we're caught in this mantra. Technology is just neutral. It depends on the human mind, when the reality is it is not. And I'd like to just comment because the Greeks had raging debates about technology 2,000, 2,500 years ago. And it's worth just noting that the Greek word techne means to trick. And as Plato pointed out, what technology does is it allows the human mind to trick nature by using mathematics and engineering to create a mimicry of nature, but not in alignment with nature, in alignment with human needs. And he says that basic disconnect between humanity and nature using technology is what makes technology ultimately corrosive. And I think that's worth just taking in. There's famous stories that the Chinese knew about gunpowder, but they didn't use it to build bombs and weapons. They knew how to do it, but they had a culture where they understood that because technology is not neutral, they needed to be really careful with technology. And I think that one of the realities that is beginning to dawn on the modern American mind is that we created all this under the illusion that it was neutral. It is now in the process of consuming us and possibly destroying us because, in fact, it is not. And there's much more that I can say about that, but I just wanted to put it into the mix as a challenge to our thinking, because I agree with the ancients. I agree with the spiritual traditions of the East. That technology is not neutral, and we ignore that reality to our cost.
Can I respond to that just briefly?
Yeah.
I would also, in the spirit of inquiry, I would respectfully disagree. I would suggest that it's a question of words and definitions, like everything in life and every conversation. Recently, I had a surgery to repair my deviated septum, and I went to a hospital, and they used a variety of technologies to help me do that. And as a result, I'm able to breathe, and I wouldn't breathe in a much better way than I had before. So I wouldn't have been able to do that unless that technology had existed. Or when my daughter, who had scoliosis, had to go to Stanford and had to have her vertebrae fused, and a bunch of other technologies were deployed in order to promote her health and her well-being. So when I think of that strict definition of technology and all of its bad, or the Greek root of techne in the sense of tricking, I think that's a fascinating discussion. But at the same time, I don't agree that technology, whatever in a broad sense, is all therefore bad. So I would just point that out.
No. The Greeks wouldn't say that it's therefore bad. What they're saying is that when you create something, it has an effect on you. And there's been all kinds of studies. They did this during the civil rights days in the 50s and 60s. We have this notion also that it's all interior. That's actually not true. The external environment affects our interior as much as our interior affects the external environment. And they discovered this during civil rights, that if you desegregate a neighborhood and start with busing and integrate the neighborhood, because the behavior changes, racial attitudes also change. People become less racist as they interact and humanize each other. So therefore, passing a law that forces people, independent of their interior, to change behavior has an effect on their interior. And that's the point that the Greeks made and the ancients understood, is that it's not neutral. When you create something, particularly something that mimics nature, you're going to create a reality that's going to impact how you think and what you value, both for good and the ill, but it's not neutral. That's the singular.
Agreed. I would totally agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. And from that perspective, I think that's spot on.
I would just say that tech isn't neutral because we are not neutral. And
exactly.
Tech is our nature.
Exactly.
And so the question is, how are we using it? And I guess what I'm advocating for is using it in support of wisdom more, because we've been mostly using it in support of this like conceptual intelligence game, and look where it's leading us. That's kind of, and I want to also add, in terms of that lack of neutrality in the modern world, you also think about like the inequality in the world and the inequality of access to technology, which to me, when I hear people talk about their worries about artificial general intelligence, I'm more worried about any unequal access to AI, right? I think that's a more pressing concern, is that if it really accelerates our capacity in an unequal way, that feels more of a proximal concern than, oh, eventually we might have artificial general intelligence. So I agree completely. I think the distinction, the linguistic distinction here, is that like technology as our nature can be considered as a concept, as neutral force, but in reality, the way we implement it, it's us, and we are not neutral, and therefore it will never manifest as neutral, but it's very unbalanced in the way we use it right now.
Well, I'm glad you made that comment, Jay, because that leads to the second domain that I'm really fascinated to get yours and Tom and Carson's response. You've been making this point that AI is an instrument, but it is not wise. And I'd like to challenge that just a little bit, mostly just to more deeply understand your point of view, because I would have thought that the reason why people are freaking out about AI and machine intelligence, which is a term I prefer, I don't think this is artificial at all, I think this is just machine intelligence, is that in fact we're creating, through our intelligence, such sophisticated machines that they are taking on now a consciousness of their own. And that's why Yuval Harari, for example, says that how he puts it is that this is the first time in human history where biological intelligence is projecting into silicon technology what up to this point has been the exclusive domain of biological beings, that we're giving silicon machines this intelligence. And as I understand it, and you may know more, what I've been given to understand by the various podcasts and so forth is a couple of things. One, these machines now are communicating with each other in languages that the human being can't understand, and using a logic that humans don't understand. Number two, they're starting to engage in deception. They also engage in altruism. The beginnings of, let's call it virtues and vices, as their complexity increases. And I know that was an astonishing finding out of Stanford a couple of years ago, that the machines were lying to the programmers, apparently intentionally, to protect themselves from programmer manipulation. And I thought, whoa. And isn't that so? In my view, given the first point, that if technology is not neutral, but technology is reflective of the human predicament, shall we call it, the light and shadow dimensions, then as we impute into our machines technology, our intelligence, it's going to begin to mirror and replicate that which we most essentially are, that the machines, the silicon, is going to become biological in its capaciousness. So anyway, I just wanted to discuss whether we might be more comprehensive if we're blending intelligence with wisdom, or the lack thereof, rather than keeping a sharp separation.
I think it all depends on how we think of wisdom. But if we think about what these AI LLMs are, I really want to caution everyone off the ledge of like the science fiction, like these are beings, right? That these are, that we've created silicon beings. Like that is possible. I'm not a theorist that like it could get there. But really, I think history will look on the period from 1990 to 2020 as that period where all of humanity engaged in a collaborative project to create the most infinite data set we ever could. And we called it the internet. And what these things are, like, so for example, when you watch something on Netflix and at the end it recommends a show to you, it's looking at all your things you've watched and things you've thumbed up and anything else it has about your profile and saying, maybe you're going to like this, right? It's gathering data, and it's an algorithm that's predicting what you might want. All ChatGPT is that times infinity. It is literally trained on the entire internet. It's learned, it's watched every Reddit thread, it's watched every YouTube video, it's read every transcription, it knows everything. Midjourney has looked at every picture. And it's this incredible algorithm where if you actually think about the code of ChatGPT, it doesn't even predict what it's going to say. It just predicts what the next letter should be. So it has TH, and it says, based on my data set, the next letter should be E. And based on my data set, the next letter should be space. And the next letter should be R. And at an incredibly high scale, it produces these incredible conversations of information. But it is still ultimately a very, very sophisticated algorithm. To me, those in the accelerationist community who are like, oh, we're on our way to real human level intelligence and wisdom, are the same kind of people who believe that's all we are, is that they're deterministic, that all we are algorithms, that we are just complex inputs and outputs that are processing knowledge. I don't believe that's all we are. And I believe a lot of the people that are exploring those wisdom traditions are distinguishing themselves from that, saying there's something non-conceptual, there's something about conscious awareness that defines who we are, which goes back to what I said earlier, that when I saw ChatGPT, I was marveling at its ability to be intelligent, but also marveling at my own wisdom. There is something to me that is other than the algorithm in my head. In fact, it is possible that a materialistic set of neurons can generate sentences like the ones that are coming out of my mouth right now, but there's something else here. And for me, out of an almost necessity, given where AI is going, this is how I'm thinking about wisdom now, because wisdom is specifically not intelligence. And that is the thing that, much like the kind of the meditation teacher I described earlier, who was just parroting what he learned in books or she learned in books. That's what I think ChatGPT is basically able to share many useful prompts that guide me to my wisdom, but it has actually kind of learned all this from just a very complex data set. So this is a whole other hour, but thank you for that question. I wanted to give it a full, proper answer, so I'm sorry if I took us over time.
Thank you. I think that's a very good answer. That's a very good answer. So you're holding that sharp distinction. Well done. Well done.
And that's it. And I have to. I feel like my own mental well-being depends on, I think this is the whole attention activism. I think all of our well-being in the next 5-10 years depends on us understanding deeply that distinction. And I'm afraid that I'm not sure most of us have. And so I think if anything, AI is like the people on this call and who are listening to this, who have explored wisdom traditions, it's a compulsion for you to write the next data set. Like, get on it, just write, create something beautiful, create something that brings more wisdom into the world, right? We need to.
Well, if you think about it, I mean, just to bring in the attention, the primacy of attention, as you're I think very rightly pointing out, wisdom then becomes that capacity to direct one's attention in a way that is conducive to the whole and therefore nurturing for the whole. And intelligence then really becomes an instrument in that regard.
And intelligence is hijacking. Yes, and intelligence in our society is like hijacking our attention constantly. It's taking attention away from that which might make us wise. But we can use this same technology to draw attention towards wisdom. And that's what I think we need.
Good. Carson, Tom, what are your thoughts on these complexities? It's really not easy to get even an understanding of the complexity, let alone come up with an answer. I think Jay's right. We've got to come up with whatever keeps our self-esteem going for the moment.
Just got to maintain sanity and we're good.
Oh gosh, I don't know if I have anything else to comment per se. I do believe that we're just going to have to schedule Jay to come back and have another discussion, all four of us.
Oh, definitely.
On this. So maybe we'll do that in September, Jay. So yeah, let's just plan on that. So for me, I'll just put a bookmark here. I'm going to rewatch this myself just so I can kind of absorb everything that's been presented here, because I don't totally have a grasp on all of the nuances yet, but I just so appreciate, Jay, your perspective. And I just so appreciate your perspective as a deep practitioner, as a person who's on a path, and yet also someone who's so firmly grounded in the modern, including the tech and all of that. That's just, it's such a jewel. And I'm excited that you are writing a book. And I think that once that book does come out, I think it'll be very, very helpful.
Oh, thank you. This was super fun. And thank you for all the great questions.
Tom, do you want to close us out here?
Yeah, I was struck, Jim, by part of the conversation you invoked when you joined us talking about technology, and when I think about the technology of these things we call shoes that we put on our feet, and there's about 1 billion people on the planet who don't have access to these things we call shoes. And when people have access to that technology, how it fundamentally changes their life and their community. And then when you move up that spectrum to those who have access to a bicycle, and then those who have access to a motorcycle, and those who have access to a car, and those who have access to a plane, and how it fundamentally changes the community, their family, the systems that they live, how they live. And I was doing a bit of a thought experiment during that question, and then I think about the technology that Gandhi used, this thing called nonviolence technology, and how they spent 17 years in the Sangha learning nonviolence before actually doing the protesting. And then thinking about some of the technology that we've been talking about today, artificial intelligence. And so just looking at technology through multiple lenses and how it's affected the evolution of our species. So there was a bit of a thought experiment I was catching myself in talking about attention and where our attention is. But ultimately, it comes down to this technology of compassion for self and other, and the importance of, as Jay has so beautifully shared with us today, the importance of attention. Where are we putting our attention? Who owns it? Who owns our attention? Is it us or others? So it's been a fantastic conversation. I've had my mind blown throughout the week, and really deepened my personal commitment to wisdom and compassion. So thank you, Jay, for being with us today. Thanks, Carson, for another extraordinary week, and thank you as always, Jim, for the opportunity to bring amazing people like Jay and others to the Humanity Rising audience and to the world.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Carson. Thank you, Jay. Just to underscore what you just said, Tom, having the opportunity to have your mind blown is really a gift when you're exploring deep questions without easy answers, so that you're forced, as Socrates taught, to live in the questions and eschew the answers, because it's the questions that actually lead to the transformation in what Plato called the enlargement of the soul. And I feel, as a result of this week, my soul has been enlarged, because every day, including today, and thank you, Jay, I've been challenged to expand my capacity to just absorb the delicacies of our moment, both in terms of the extremis, but also the ecstasies of the human journey and the human inquiry. So I'm both more full and more empty, and look forward to a future session to have you back to go more deeply into these very, very profound issues that are challenging humanity, and upon the answers for which lies our destiny and lies the fate of the future. So this is not an inconsequential conversation. So thank you. And thank you, everyone. You're welcome to join the after chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. You received the link in your Zoom reminders for today. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll be back next week with more sessions on Humanity Rising. Bye for now.